The prologue intro cutscene, or the Connie and Dakota cutscene, or whatever you want to call it, is to me by far the most interesting cutscene in Dead Rising. It is chocked full of in-game lore and development history, but to this day there are still people who don't even know it exists. Even people who have been playing the game for years still claim they've never seen it. This is always a shock to me, but it kind of makes sense. The reason so many people have never seen it is the cutscene is actually hidden in a place you'd never think to look. First of all, the only way you can get this cutscene to play is in the title screen, but not only that, it will only play while the game is on the press start screen. If you press start and load a game save, it won't work. So it's easy to understand how some people have never seen it. So let's assume there are people here watching this video who haven't seen it. Of course, you can see it for yourself now that you know where to find it, but today I decided to dedicate an entire video to this prologue cutscene, as I want to explore some unanswered questions about it. Who the hell is Connie and Dakota? I mean, the game certainly doesn't tell us. But not only that, today I want to talk about why this cutscene is so interesting to me, because while it may not seem like it, this cutscene is the oldest thing in Dead Rising's history. Essentially, this cutscene is the start to Dead Rising. It's the night before Frank arrives. Because when Frank arrives in Willamette, shit has already hit the fan. The outbreak is in full swing, there's barely any humans left. The entire town is gone. We don't see cops, we don't see any news choppers, and the military is blocking all entrances to Willamette. The city is lost. But in the prologue, we see how Willamette was basically the night before, where buildings were on fire and people were still trying to evacuate. The cutscene shows us the perspective of Connie and her daughter Dakota, presumably seeking shelter from what's going on. Throughout the cutscene, Connie's car is running low on fuel, so you can understand the panic of having to be stuck out here. Eventually, Connie approaches on a mountainside road overlooking Willamette, and she becomes completely distracted with the chaos below. Suddenly, her car is then struck by an 18-wheeler. After Connie wakes up from the crash, she realizes the car will no longer start, leaving them trapped on the side of a road as a swarm of zombies surround them. And the last thing we hear is their scream. It's pretty heavy stuff. So, there it is. It's not a very complex cutscene, but it's universally agreed to be one of the best pieces of lore in Dead Rising's story. We don't have any cutscene showing backstory of Santa Cabeza, so having this little prologue cutscene gives us some glimpse into the world of Dead Rising before Frank West. But here's the thing, we are actually extremely lucky we got this cutscene, because it has no place within the game. Nowhere in the game's actual story do we ever hear about Connie and Dakota, but I can assure you the developers didn't just create this cutscene just so they can throw it into the game as a hidden cutscene. Of course not. This cutscene is literally the oldest thing in the entire game, and you don't actually have to look that deep to find this out. If you pull up the earliest trailer of Dead Rising, that trailer actually opens with this cutscene. That's all the proof you need. Of course, there's some other very old stuff in that E3 reveal, like the thug zombie and the cop zombie, both of which still exist in the game today. So yeah, there's a lot of ancient assets within this E3 trailer, all of which you can call the earliest thing in the game, but the prologue cutscene is an entire cutscene. And despite Dead Rising changing drastically since 2005, this cutscene managed to survive and make its way into the final game. It's still here after all this time. Which makes you wonder, maybe the reason this cutscene has existed for so long is because potentially in 2005 it wasn't a prologue cutscene, and it might have actually been something within the game's story. They might have been planning to involve Connie and Dakota from the very start. Now, it's quite difficult to talk about this, as footage of such a crazy theory is kind of rare. Although, have a look at this piece of concept art from 2005. Behind a very early Frank West was none other than Dakota. Now this could have been done for the sake of concept art, but who's to say for sure? For all we know, the absolute earliest functioning builds of Dead Rising might have had a story which involved Frank saving Dakota. It's not too much of a stretch from reality. I mean, every other aspect of Dead Rising from 2005 was changed in a major way, so why wouldn't the story involve Dakota at one point? Because we know that in later 2005, the story still showed off some really weird differences from the final game, like Larry holding Isabella capture instead of Carlito, and Jesse dying in the tunnels instead of Brad. The changes we know of in the story were pretty crazy, even in late 2005. So saying that this cutscene might have actually been something within the game's story at one point doesn't sound so crazy when you look at all of Dead Rising's beta changes as a whole. So who is Connie and Dakota? Are they just survivors escaping Willamette who encountered the same fate as everyone else, or were they a little more important than that? It's kind of hard to say. We know so much about Dead Rising's beta history, but some things, primarily the beta story, is shrouded in mystery. You can take the easy approach and just say it's a simple prologue cutscene of Dead Rising, and I wouldn't fault you for that, because in the final game that's exactly what it is. But we can't ignore how much history this cutscene has in Dead Rising. The cutscene dates back to a time where everything was different, a time where Isabella was apparently African American, and a third unknown DHS agent existed. Changes in the gameplay and in the story were happening at light speed. The most likely scenario is that Capcom's original script for Dead Rising might have, in some way, involved Connie and Dakota, but as development went on, there was no place for them in the story. But Capcom realized they still had this nearly finished cutscene sitting on the cutting room floor, and they decided to just include it into the game as an Easter egg, but as a shell of what it used to be. The cutscene is no longer important, and some people have never even seen it. That should tell you everything. All I can really say is that I hope one day an early 2005 build surfaces online, as really that's all we would need to learn so much about the game's beta story. We need a 2005 build of the game to really explore the history further, and maybe one day that will happen. But until that day arrives, thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more.